Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the AVAIL Leadership Podcast. My name is Virgil Sierra. I'm the AVAIL Leadership Media host. I'm also the lead pastor of Vertical Church, also known as Iglesia Vertical in South Florida, where we are one church, two languages. And AVAIL Leadership is a leadership brand for the Christian leader. Our heart, as always, is to bring great content and great resources that will equip today's leaders, whether you're in the church, in the marketplace, in parachurch ministries or organizations. Our heart is to equip you and help you in this art of leadership. Today, I have the honor of connecting with Pastor John Jenkins. He's the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Glenarden, which has a couple of locations in Maryland. Pastor John is committed in his quest to develop dynamic disciples. He's been in leadership at many churches. He's been in leadership in nonprofits. He's counseled many top-level leaders in both the ministry and political spheres. He's a chairman of the board of the National Association of Evangelicals, and he's also received an honorary doctorate of divinity from Southern California School of Ministry. Pastor John and his wife, Trina, are the proud parents of 6 children and 5 grandchildren, and I think that number is growing. Pastor John, we are so honored that you would take time to connect with us here at the AVAIL Leadership Podcast. We are both excited and expectant to learn from you. And so before we get into a few questions, how do you feel? How's it feel to be here with us at the AVAIL Leadership Podcast?
Pastor Virgil, thank you so much for the invitation and having me with you today. Let me begin by just telling you how honored I am. I'm excited and thrilled. This is a dynamic element of what you all are providing for leaders, and it's an honor to be a part of that. I want to thank you and the AVAIL team. I want to thank my dear friend, my mentor, my coach, Dr. Sam Chan, who has provided such wisdom over the years to me beyond descriptions. I'm honored to be a part of what y'all are doing. I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that everybody who's connected with us on this episode is going to be blessed by you, Pastor John. There's a lot of people who know you. You've been in a lot of circles, whether it's leadership, whether it's the church, whether it's, even in the political sphere, being in close to the Washington, D.C. area. There's a lot of people who know who you are, but I know that there's some young leaders and also some new leaders who are going to get to know you. So why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey, what you do, where you are, how you got there?
Well, let me start off by saying I've crossed over into the 60s. I'm 61 years of age. I'll be 62 in about a month. And I've been in ministry for a long time. I've been preaching for 47 years. I started as a teenager, 15 years of age. My pastor licensed me to the criticism of so many other pastors, but some of those other pastors also always invited me to come and do their youth services. So I've been doing it for a long time, pastoring my home church here for this is my 31st year that I've been the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Glenarden, just outside of Washington, D.C. But that's not what makes who I am. What I'm most proud of is that I'm married to Trina Jenkins, my wife of 40 years. This Sunday, we celebrate 40 years of being married. I have 6 wonderful children. They're all grown and graduated from school and college and gainfully employed. I'm a grandfather to 5 and a half. Got another one on the way. I'm thrilled to be a family man. I'm actually committed and love my family. And I think family is the cornerstone of our culture and our society. And I'm honored to have a wonderful family, and I'm honored to lead a fantastic church. It's a tremendous church. It's over 100 years old. It was started in 1917, so we've passed over that 100-year mark, and it's a great church, great people, and it's my privilege. And by the way, it's my home church. I grew up in this church. It is the only church I've ever belonged to in my life.
Wow.
Even though I have pastored at another church prior to this one, this is the only one that I've ever actually had membership at. And it's just a privilege and an honor. I'm living my dream life, and I'm grateful and thankful to God for that.
Hey, that's amazing. What I want to kind of park here for a second on family. First of all, it's amazing, that you've been ministering and pastoring. You've been doing this for over 45 years, and you've been pastoring this church that you grew up in. It's the only church you've been in. You've been pastoring it for 31 years. That's amazing. But I want to just pause here for a second. You're about to celebrate, as at the time of this recording, your 40th and wedding anniversary with your wife, Trina. You got 6 kids. You got 5.5 grandkids. Okay, so you're a man that throughout these years has had a lot on your plate. And I think there's a lot of leaders who are either headed in the same direction on their journeys with ministry and family and church, right? What are some practical tips, Pastor John, that you have that you can share with us regarding balancing leadership responsibilities and family responsibilities? Because they're both important, but I think sometimes while we're trying to juggle things, we can get in trouble.
Yeah, and that's probably a very significant question that you're raising and asking, and I could talk about that for the rest of the day. But let me just try to summarize and tell you this, that if I had the opportunity to talk, especially to young pastors, or those who are new into the pastorate, I would say to them, do not sacrifice your family for ministry. That is not what the Lord Jesus has called us to do. He's already made the sacrifice for us, and he has not called us to sacrifice our families, our marriages, our children for the health of the church. And I had to learn that the hard way, Pastor Virgil. I had made the mistake of compromising and making ministry more important than my family. And the fact that I have a vibrant relationship with my kids today is a miracle from God, because like so many other pastors, I was so much in pursuit of significance and importance and value and connecting with the right people and knowing the right people. I was so passionate about that for a great portion of my early pastorate, I forsook my family and neglected my marriage and neglected my kids. And if I had to do it over again, I would never compromise that. The time that goes, your children's lives just breezes by so fast. I'm looking back on 40 years and I wish I could go back and spend more time with my kids and make more memories and laugh with them and roll in the grass and play games with them more than I did. Pray with them and build that walk with Christ with them better than I have. So if I had to do it over again, God will honor you when you put your marriage and your family at the top of the agenda. And don't sacrifice your family or your marriage for ministry.
I think that's such an important word. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. I'm taking mental notes right now, and I'm going to be able to listen back on this later, because I think especially as young leaders, or leaders who maybe are kind of starting off the journey, it's so easy to get caught up and wrapped up with, I want to be significant. I want to do things that are going to make a difference. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that desire. But I think that sometimes it could be a strategy that the enemy uses to compete with maybe what's most important.
Absolutely. You're right, target on. And the devil will, you can get caught up with doing a good thing in a wrong way, or at the wrong time. And I had been guilty of that. They were good things I was doing. I was involved with the church and ministry and all of that. Those are good things to do.
Yeah.
But not at the expense of your family, not at the expense of your marriage, not at the expense of loving on your kids. And again, if I had to do it over again, I would make memories. Let me talk about that for a moment.
That's good.
I would make more memories with my kids. We didn't have the iPhone when my kids were growing up, but now we have the iPhone. I would say to young parents, take videos, take pictures and review those things, because that's going to play a significant role in your children's lives, in their image of who their parents are and what their parents mean to them and what family means to them.
Yeah.
So many people have had jacked up marriages and jacked up families and jacked up parents that they don't think about marriage. They don't want to come near marriage. They don't want no family because their experience with it has been so horrifying.
Wow.
So marriage is supposed to be a reflection, a powerful reflection of relationship between Christ and the church. That's what marriage is supposed to be. And so we should work diligently to make it fresh and alive. One of the things, let me say this real quick, because I could talk about family and marriage for the rest of the day, and I know that's not the topic for the day, but this is important to me. I learned God convicted me one
Mm,
time because I had been, here's the big bird word, insensitive to my wife.
okay.
Insensitive.
Okay. I've heard that before.
Yeah, I had been insensitive to her, and I thought all of life revolved around me and my wishes and my wants, and my wife was doing everything she could to keep me happy. And God convicted me one day and said that if I wanted him, 1 Peter 3:7, if I wanted him to answer my prayers,
Uh-huh.
I needed to dwell with her according to knowledge and understanding, to
Yeah.
understand her and to enter into her world and to engage with her and be sensitive to who she is and treat her as the weaker vessel. Just be compassionate. And God said, if you don't do that, your prayers will be hindered. And I didn't want my prayers to be hindered. And so God convicted me of how wrong I had been. And ever since that day, I have been doing my best to be sensitive to my wife, to engage in her world. Pastor Virgil, I'm watching the Home and Garden channel with her. Um, I'm going shopping with her.
That's
And
right.
I discovered that when you do that, the God we serve rewards you and blesses you in tremendous ways.
Yeah. That's a good word. I think just as I was hearing you talk right now, it comes to mind. I know that I have felt almost like extra weight and extra burdens when things at home aren't well, whether it's in the marriage or whether it's with our kids. And so that's going to lead us kind of into the heart of today's conversation. You've been leading ministry over 45 years, right? Um, I'm confident because I know how this is in my short years in comparison to you, right? That you've probably run into some leadership fatigue issues, and so kind of connecting these two things. When things aren't well in the marriage at home, and when we're struggling balancing our family well, it almost adds an extra burden, an extra weight, which can cause us to fatigue even more. So I want us to delve into this concept of leadership fatigue from your experience and your learning. What are some signs, and maybe you have some examples, but what are some signs that there may be some leadership fatigue creeping in?
Yeah. So, and again, that's a great question you're asking, and an important one, because um, I've had some experiences over my journey that almost took me out of ministry.
Wow.
The statistics and psychologists tell us that pastoring is one of the most stressful jobs on the
Yeah.
planet. And, one 20 or 30-minute sermon is equivalent, according to them, to 8 hours of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's stressful. Plus all of the preparation and the decisions that have to be made and the people that you have to deal with. Ministry would be great if it wasn't for people.
Amen.
You got to deal with people that are not always kind and compassionate and sensitive and
Yeah.
understanding. So I think one of the signs is when you feel the burden and the pressure
Hmm.
that you have to get something done, or you feel the pressure that you got to do this, or
Hmm.
feel the stress that you got to make a move. That's a sign of fatigue. When you get to a place where you're overburdened and you're making quick or poor decisions, that's
Yeah.
when you're flying off the handle and treating people wrong, that's a
Hmm.
sign of fatigue. When you're acting out of your nature, when you're
Hmm.
cussing people out,
Right.
when you're just, you're not your normal self, those are signs that you're entering into fatigue lane, and we
Wow.
don't want to be on that road. So that's the time. That's a wake up call. You don't want to get there, but when you get there, it's
Yeah.
time to pause and say, you know what? I shouldn't snapped at my wife like that. I shouldn't barked at my kids like that.
Hmm.
I shouldn't have been insensitive to that leader who asked me a question about something. That's a sign of fatigue, and so we don't want to get there. We don't want to be.
Who, in your experience, who has there been anybody that's helped you see it when you haven't seen it, or maybe realize it? Because I know, obviously, even just talk about marriage, that's kind of like a big click for me. A lot of times my wife will identify something or ask me a question that makes me think, why is she asking me that? But is there anybody that God has used specifically to help you realize, hey, John, you're getting out of your lane, you're getting out of sorts?
Yeah, so I have several relationships that hold me accountable. First of all, I have a pastor. I think every pastor
Yeah.
needs to have a pastor,
Yeah.
somebody to whom you submit to, whose authority you're under, who has the authority and the right to tell you to sit down, to tell you, you're out of order, you're out of your lane, you're doing the wrong stuff. I have a pastor.
That's good.
Who holds me accountable, who asks me the question. They have the right to ask me any questions, and my promise and commitment is to always tell them the truth. But I also have peers, people who I have personal relationships with, who they're not my pastors, but they're my close friends.
Yeah.
Who are close enough to me to see that I'm maybe not acting in my normal way. And I think it's critical that everybody has those kind of relationships. Matter of fact, I don't think you should even go into pastorate or into ministry unless you have those kinds of relationships, because you need those kind of people in your life to hold you accountable, or to be your mirror, to say to you, hey, you're acting a little crazy, or you're not looking at right, or you're not behaving in a way that's reflective of who you are. I think that's critical and important.
Yeah, and I think from my experience, having those voices that have a green light, so to speak, to talk to us is so important, but it doesn't happen on accident, and it doesn't happen automatically. I have found you have to be intentional, and you have to kind of seek it out, and you have to,
absolutely
say, I need some accountability,
Right. And most leaders, they don't want accountability. They don't want to have to answer to anybody, but it's absolutely necessary. It's critical that you have that in your life.
That's good. I want to stay in on this subject of leadership fatigue. You just talked about some of the signs, right? And I think it's true. I think when we see ourselves acting out of our normal character, or when we're kind of thrown off quickly, and these are all signs that whether it's an overseer, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a counselor, and sometimes even, it's our wife, or our spouse, that's seeing something, or just asking questions. Hey, are you okay? Or are you getting enough rest? These are all signs. So what are some practical ways, Pastor John, that leaders can deal with leadership fatigue, can overcome it? Because I think it's inevitable. I mean, even if you haven't been in for 45 years plus, even if it's only been 4 months, you might fall into some leadership fatigue. What are some practical tips or advice that you have?
If I could talk to every pastor, here's what I would tell them to do. Let me tell you a little story. What happened to me once? I woke up one morning, and I started vomiting and couldn't stop vomiting. I got ill, and they took me to the hospital, and they took an MRI. For whatever reason, they took an MRI and came back and told me that I had a brain aneurysm. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's it's when you burst a vein in your brain. It's when, actually, that's a stroke, but it's when they see a bubble on the vein.
Right.
Brain. And so the aneurysm occurs before the stroke.
Right.
So I went, and they said, we cannot treat that here. We cannot treat that aneurysm. We have to send you to another hospital. So they transported me to another hospital. And by the time I got to the other hospital, when they did their testing, they said, we can't find the aneurysm. So you don't have one. So either they misdiagnosed me at the first hospital, or maybe God healed me between the two hospitals. So people can decide what they want. Anyway, when I left that hospital, my elders said, we want you to go away. And they sent me away, put me on a plane, and sent me to the Virgin Islands.
Okay.
Glory. Hallelujah.
I feel the Spirit leading me too.
And I didn't realize how stressed out I was.
Wow.
I didn't realize how tired I was. I slept for 5 days.
Wow.
I didn't do anything. Didn't feel like
you hibernated.
Yeah, I didn't want to do anything. All I did was got up to eat, and that was it. And went back and laid down for
Wow.
5 days, every day. And I didn't even feel like doing anything until it was time to come home.
Hmm.
And when I came from that hiatus, that brief vacation, the elders held me accountable in my church, and they challenged me, and I incorporated into my life. Here's where I'm leading to this point right here.
Yeah.
I incorporated into my life a regular sabbatical.
Okay.
Now, people talk about a sabbatical, so I'm not talking about 3 or 4 months away.
Right.
Not that kind of sabbatical.
Right.
A weekly or daily or monthly sabbatical is what I worked into my life. When they were rolling me out of the first hospital to take me to the second hospital, I saw my kids. The word had gotten out. My kids had lined up at the hospital, and I saw them with tears flowing down their eyes, and lined up, and they had them in a place where I couldn't touch them, and they couldn't. All I could do was holler out to me. I couldn't even hug them or anything. And I realized that I had been working so hard and so diligent, calling myself pleasing God, that I had neglected my kids and neglected my own health.
Right.
So I worked into my life a system and a pattern of rest.
Wow.
I cannot tell you how important it is. So everybody got to figure out what their rhythm is.
Right.
You got to figure out what works for you. My rhythm is I work for 3 weeks, then I take a week off. That's my rhythm. I work hard for 3 weeks, then I take the entire week off. So every month I get a week to just do whatever I want to do. I don't have to teach Bible study that week. I don't have to go to no meetings that week. I just rest. And I get replenished, and I get refreshed, and I get renewed. And I would say to pastors, you got to figure out what your rest is. Maybe it's once a week, or maybe it's once a month, or I don't know how you figure out it is. But if you're working all the time and the pastorate can drain you and have you working 7 days a week, you're outside of the will of God, if that's what you're doing. If you're stressing yourself and doing all of that, you're outside of the will of God.
That's really good. And 2 things I want to mention kind of in this conversation that we're having right now. This is so important, Pastor John. Well, number one, even going back to family and ministry, right? I'm a pastor's kid. I took over the church that my parents, planted a little over 25 years ago. My wife is actually on staff. She's also one of the pastors here on staff with us. She's a leader, but sometimes it's hard to distinguish the lines between home and ministry, because we're both leading and we're both have a calling, in ministry. But I've noticed, for example, my pace, I can run, and I can run hard. She can run, but she can run for sprints, and she just needs that time. So sometimes even understanding in the concept of our families that there's a little bit of a different pace, but then even seasons of life, because I'm sure that maybe the way you could run and you could do ministry has adjusted and adapted a bit in the different seasons of your life, right? But here's what I want to touch on, and I want to hear your insight on this. I know that I have felt guilty at times taking a break. The concept of a pastor's, always on, as a pastor, you're not clocking, and I know I felt guilty, right? Like, is it okay that I'm taking a day off, or is it okay that I'm taking this week off? And what are people going to say? And, those people that don't really know what they're talking about, and they say, oh, nice to be a pastor and only work 1 day a week, right? They have no idea what they're saying, right? And so, what are your thoughts about that? Because I think some leaders some pastors specifically might feel guilty taking rest or time off.
Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head, Pastor Virgil. Guilt is a tool of the enemy. Guilt is a demonic emotion. Yeah. The enemy wants to bring that upon you. That's not the will of God. It's not the heart of God. There will always be work to be done. Ministry will always, you will never be finished. When I used to work, I had a government job, and I always took pride that when the day was over, my inbox was empty. I didn't have stuff to do left over from the previous day to do the next day. But ministry is not like that. You can't do that. You're going to always have a need, always somebody to counsel, always some phone call to make, always some sermon or Bible study to prepare, always some meeting to have. That's ministry never stops.
Right.
But Jesus, the Bible says God created the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested.
That's right.
He took a break. Now, that's a model for all of us.
Yeah.
And he tells us to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That Sabbath, it was designed for our rest. God designed us to have periods of rest. In multiple occasions in Scripture, Jesus took his disciples and said, I want you to go aside and rest a while.
Yeah.
So that's the will of God. And any guilt that you feel, and that's the thing that drives so many people, is the guilt.
Yeah.
That guilt is not from God. That's the tool of the enemy to stress you out, burn you out. It's not God. Don't let guilt be the driving force for your decisions or your choices.
That's so good. Pastor John, how old were you when you took the senior pastor position?
I think I was 29.
All right. So if you could go back to 29-year-old Pastor John Jenkins, FBC Glenarden, and you wanted to address this issue of, hey, get some rest, what specifically would you say?
So, I was working, 7 days a week. I didn't even have a day off.
Wow.
But what I would say to people, you have a day off. Have a day off that you reverence and honor and protect.
Yeah.
Tell your staff members, tell your people, I'm not going to be at the church this day. I ain't coming by the church. Don't call me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking at my emails. I'm not taking no phone calls.
No work.
No work. That's the sabbatical day that you are off. That's the very first thing I would tell you.
Wow.
Put some boundaries around your schedule. Put some boundaries around it. I think that's important. And so eventually I started learning to do that, to put some boundaries around it and spend that time with my family. I learned, but not early on I didn't learn. But so if I had to say to 29-year-old John Jenkins, don't sacrifice that day, that time of rest that you deserve, and put boundaries around it. Tell your leaders I'm off that day.
Yeah, and that's good, because I think there's an aspect of actual physical health. This is something it's when we follow this commandment, literally, right, from God, this is something that brings our bodies physical health. It can really incorporate emotional and soul health in our relationships, of course, and even spiritual health. I think there's so many reasons why this is something we have to do. And the earlier we do it, the better. And so we would be wise to hear voices like yours, Pastor John, to say, hey, we need to evaluate how we're taking our day-to-day, week-to-week, and really give it a place of importance. Let's transition a little bit. Go ahead.
Before you, I want to say one other thing on that I think is very, very important. Here's a tool I used. Here's something I learned over the years. I wish somebody had told me earlier. This what I'm going to say right now is worth this podcast right here. Here's a principle that I've worked into my life, that I've learned, that I wish every pastor would learn. I only do what only I can do.
Okay. Unpack that.
Yeah. Only do what only you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only doing the things that only I can do. In other words, if somebody else can do it, I'm delegating. Pastors got to learn how to delegate. Yeah. And I determined and looked at the things that have to be done, and what are the things that only I can do, that are my responsibilities to do, that only my gifting can carry out. Yeah. Let other people take the assignment of other things, and don't feel like you have to do everything. If everything stops at the pastor's desk, there's a problem there. That's not healthy. That's not good. Everything can't stop at your desk. You got to delegate and empower and authorize other people to take that load, some of that load, and you only do the things that only you can do. That's what I'm doing now. I'm only doing the stuff that only I can do.
That's so good. I've heard it this way. I've heard it said that the deeper you can go into an organization where people can actually say yes or no, the bigger and the more influential that organization can be. That's a great word, Pastor John. And I think that's hard, especially when you're a church planter and you're starting out, because you kind of got to have all those hats on. But the truth is, the sooner you start developing and empowering and deploying people to lead, whether they have titles or not, as long as they have abilities and you're pouring into them, that's going to be a huge value to your leadership and your pastorate. That's a great word. Let's transition a little bit here, connecting all these pieces together. We're living in 2020. as we're recording this, Pastor John, which I believe we can agree is probably one of those years that kind of stands out from all the other years. It's a year where we've experienced globally, we've experienced crisis, definitely change. Speak into this about leaders adapting effectively to changes that are unexpected, in this season of COVID-19. How do we adapt? How do we lead well in the midst of these crises and unexpected changes?
So what I have decided to do is to recognize where my strengths are. What is it that I'm good at? What is it that I have knowledge and giftings in? And what is it that I don't have giftings in? I think leadership is being smart enough to recognize what you're not good at and empowering those who are good to do some things. So, this pandemic has caused us to do ministry different. And so what I've started doing, our church has started doing, is we've come up with a creative team. And they come up with the creative ideas of how we're going to present worship now.
Wow.
There's not a creative bone in my body.
But you got the right people at the table, right?
There you go. I put the people who have that in the gift, and that's leadership. I don't have to come up with everything. The pastor doesn't have to determine and decide and come up with all of the issues. Great leadership is recognizing who can get it done and empowering those people to do it.
So true.
So to me, that's what good leadership is, especially in this crisis day. Find the people around you, because you know what I believe, Pastor? I believe God gives you everything you need in your ministry to do what you need to do. They're there. And it's just a matter of you are finding them, identifying them, and empowering them to do it. And so I'm proud of our creative team. They have come up with great ideas, and they've breathed life. So my thing is, what we're going to do when we have to go back to church? What we're going to do? Because we cannot go back to the way it used to be. So I'm going to utilize their knowledge and their giftings and their call. I'm going to utilize them. They're great.
This is so good. I remember early on in my experience, pastoring, I remember having, my days where I wanted to just mope before the Lord. I don't know if that's ever happened. I just wanted to complain. And I was just like, Lord, I wish I had somebody who could do this. Lord, I wish I had somebody, until the Lord snapped me out of it. A couple leaders and a couple pastor church conferences that helped me kind of shake out of that. And God spoke to me what you just said, that everything that the Lord wants this church, our church, to accomplish, he's put it there. But it's my responsibility to, as Dr. Sam Chand would say, discover, develop, and deploy, right? And it's not easy, but that's what we're called to do.
Amen. Outstanding. I love it. I love it. And that's exactly what every pastor, especially young pastor, needs to know. What you need, God's got it there. So just find it. And I love Dr. Chand's perspective on it. Discover, develop, and deploy. I love that. Yes.
Yeah. And I like what you were saying about just finding the right people. And, sometimes the right people at the table aren't necessarily exactly what you expect them to be because of how it was in the past. I think sometimes, especially in church leadership, it would be very easy for maybe senior leadership, established, veteran leadership to maybe not realize the value that there are in a 19-year-old, or in a young person who might not have necessarily the biblical understanding of all these things, however, has a gifting that would add great value. Would you speak into that?
Absolutely, yeah. And they might not even look like what you think they ought to look like, or behave the way you think they ought to look like.
Or dress.
Yeah. Some of the great people that have surprised me in an unexpected way. I didn't expect that they could do this, or I didn't see them in that light. But yet God had them there, and God brought them to light. So they're there. You just have to unveil and give them the opportunity. They just need the opportunity. They just need somebody to say, go for it. Give it a try. Let's see how you do at this.
That's good.
Yeah, just give them an opportunity. That's what it means.
Hey, something I found out about you when we first kind of connected to get prepared for this podcast, I found out that you're a pilot. which I think is that's a pretty cool thing, because I don't know many. I know a few, but I think it's pretty cool when somebody can get into a plane and actually fly that plane. So I know that you're a pilot, you fly airplanes. Talk to us a little bit about that. And then, is there a connection? Have you learned any leadership lessons from being a pilot or flying an aircraft?
Oh my goodness gracious. How much time do we have left over? Let me begin by telling you that a plane flies by virtue of laws of aerodynamics.
Okay.
And as long as everything is in place, the plane will fly every time. I've been flying for 18 years. I started taking lessons in 2001, got my license in 2002, and been flying ever since. And the thing I learned is that the laws of aerodynamics are consistent and will happen. The plane will take off, if everything's the way it's supposed to be, 100% of the time. And what I try to teach pastors is, if you have the principles of God's truth in place in your church, you will breed success and victory every time. So it's just a matter of learning what those principles are and applying them in your life. It's a matter of learning what church growth principles are, how to resolve conflict, put those things in place, how to get people working together as a team, put those principles in place, learn them and apply them, and you'll win every time. So that's probably the big lesson I learned. And when I get up in the air, here's the thing about flying, that when I get up in the air, I take my mind off of church. That's my stress reliever. I take my mind off of problems and issues and counseling. And I'm just saying to myself, how am I going to get this thing down on the ground safely? And I love it. So it's a stress reliever for me. So I love flying, and there's so many principles I've learned about flying, but yes, that's probably a significant one right there.
That's good. Well, I already told you last time we talked, I'm hoping one day to enjoy a flight with you. If we can make that happen, we'll see.
Hey, I might have to fly down to where you are and take you up one day. That'll be fun.
I like it. Mm-hmm. I like it. Hey, you've had experience not only in church, but just around a lot of leaders in different spheres and different areas. I think the pitfalls that leaders can fall in can vary and can look different depending on season of life. And maybe let's consider this. Let's just consider two groups, right? Although, there's so many variables, but let's consider young leaders, maybe less experienced leaders, and then seasoned veteran leaders, maybe more time, more experience. Between these two, what are some of the pitfalls that you see? Let's start off with young leaders. What are some of the pitfalls you see young leaders fall into?
So here's probably the biggest one that I see happening all the time, that again, I wish I could say to young leaders, is expecting change without properly preparing the congregation for the change.
Okay.
Preparing people for change. So I've learned over the years, and our church has changed significantly.
Yeah.
So you came 31 years ago, the Sunday before I came, and then didn't come back until the last Sunday that we had church in March. It's a totally different church.
Yeah.
Other than the people that were there when I first came and the people that are still there, you wouldn't even recognize the church. It's totally different. And so we've drastically changed our church. I could talk about 100 different things that are different. Yeah. And some of them are really significantly different. So we were able to make those changes and maintain the people, because I just didn't go out and bark out a command and say to people, this is what we're going to do, and it starts tomorrow. I didn't do that. Every change I made, I taught it.
Yeah.
I gave biblical principles behind it. I showed them why we're going to make the change. What's the need for the change? What we expect the fruit to be because of the change. And the more dramatic the change is, the more time I took to teach the change.
Yeah.
So there's some things it may be taught on in 4 months. Some things I had to teach on for over a year.
Wow.
So a lot of pastors don't have that patience. They just want to come in and make immediate changes and expect people to just change just because the pastor said so.
Yeah.
That's not wisdom. That's not how it works. That's not what you should be doing. So I would, say number one, rule number one, teach before you make a change.
Yeah.
Make that change based on some biblical truth, some biblical principle that you want to apply for the change. So that would
That's
be
good. I learned that lesson when I had the responsibility of relaunching our church, because I knew it's the same Jesus. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. The gospel doesn't change, but the methods of how we did church, I knew that some things needed to change. But I learned, because I sought out counsel, and I learned that before just telling the what, I needed to explain the why, which is exactly what you're saying. And I needed people to have an opportunity to understand the why and ask questions if they had them. And little by little, as they understood the why and the heart behind it, they became less resistant maybe and more open to the changes. That's good. What about maybe veteran, more experienced leaders that have been in the journey longer? What are some pitfalls that those leaders fall into?
I think the biggest pitfalls they make is an inability to trust younger leaders to be able to rise up and do some of the things that need to be done.
That's good.
I think it's essential that
Yeah.
the senior, older leaders are training and empowering younger leaders to step to the plate and do some of the work and do some of the things that need to be done. So I see a lot of senior leaders. See, the last thing I want to do, Pastor Virgil, is to be crawling out on the platform at 80 years of age trying to preach.
Yeah.
85 with a cane or in a walker trying to do
Right.
it. It's time to start empowering others and putting them up the front and letting them carry the man on and let them do the work. And a lot of pastors are not doing that. A lot of senior leaders still want to be the man.
Right.
You're what makes you the man is when you have the capacity to train others to do what you've been doing.
That's so good. Why do you think some older leaders are more veteran? Why do they have such a hard time with it? What is it? Insecurities, fear? I mean,
probably insecurities. That's a big deal. Insecurities is one. Fear. Here's something else. You should probably have a podcast on this topic. Preparing themselves for retirement.
Wow.
Because a lot of them have not put any money away, have not put any plans away to retire. Wow. So some of them stay in the game because they can't afford not to.
Wow.
So I think, those are two insecurities and having not prepared themselves. I'm trying to teach every pastor I can, how much money are you putting away for the day that you can't do this anymore?
Wow.
So I'm trying to press them. You need to be putting money away for the day that you can't do it, and you have to step off the scene and coach others and be a mentor to them. So, and don't be insecure. I have long passed the element of feeling insecure. I know who I am. I know whose I am. I know the gifting God's given me. I'm not jealous or threatened by anybody. Matter of fact, my glory is in empowering the younger generation to rise to the table and get the job done.
That's so good. I'm reminded of some resources that Dr. Sam Chand has, because there's not a lot of books, there's not a lot of them about this topic, but he talks a lot about exiting gracefully, and, even when I think about my father, when he kind of transferred leadership to myself and, took a step back, I just think it's something, and we had to do, there was a lot of honoring that young leadership has to do in that process, in that journey. But I think there's something powerful in having that confidence that you're talking about, but also the preparedness of having a plan, because none of us knows what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. So setting up the organization and the church to be in a place of stability, even if something unexpected happens. This is great wisdom, great insight. We got a couple more questions here as we're coming to the final stretch. Pastor John, you pastor close to Washington, D.C. I'm sure that there's challenges and also opportunities that you've experienced being so close to, I would say that not only the center of the heart of the United States of America, the capital, but maybe even one of the hearts of the world. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think I take joy, our church is not a heavily engaged with political affairs. We are heavily engaged with moral issues and biblical issues, which cross over and impacts those things. But what I'm proud of is the fact that we have a lot of people in our church who are actually working in the offices of policymakers and sometimes, is we might not be talking to the policymakers, but we're talking to people who are in the offices of
That's
policymakers, and we
right.
can influence their thinking to speak to the policymakers in
Yeah,
terms of the decisions and rules and policies that they make. So I'm proud of that our church is heavily engaged all through Washington, D.C. We got people all over the government, and I'm proud that we can say that we've been able to influence them through
that's
the
good.
servants of these people.
Yeah, well, the Lord knows we could use some more godly men and women and young people in and around DC, and may the Lord continue to guide you and your church as well to continue just shining the light of Jesus. As we're kind of wrapping it up here, Pastor John, in this season, there's multiple reasons why maybe it's been hard to maintain unity. One is on the organizational side. We're facing this crisis where many people aren't even able to work together in the same building to be with each other physically. So there's some limitations on maybe organizational unity. And obviously, we're also seeing a divide in the nation because of whether it's the racial tensions, whether it's, everything that we've been watching in the news that's happened in this crazy 2020 that has caused division or disunity. Can you, as we're kind of closing it up here, can you speak into a little bit about promoting unity? Because I know this is something that's strong in your heart as well.
If there was some way that we can encourage pastors to reach across the table to people who don't look like you, who don't come from the same environment that you come from, who weren't raised like you, and
Yeah.
cultivate relationships with people, I think that would go a very long way in helping the church to be unified. God loves unity, and we got a big
Yeah.
problem that the church is not unified right now. It's just as divided as the culture, and a part of that is because we're not reaching across the table to engage with people who don't look like us. We pretty much all stay in our little groups that look like us and believe like us and worship like us,
Right.
and the heart of God is we got to be unified, and so we got to reach across the table. I'm cultivating relationships with, and have been for years, with pastors who don't look like me.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that we could have more of that going on in the church.
How can we get better at that? I mean, has anything worked specifically well for you? Has anything not worked? Because I think that's something that could be a game changer for a lot of churches and pastors.
I think what doesn't work is when you come across somebody and you know their views are different than you, then a lot of people will make a decision. I'm not going to hang out with that person. I'm not
Right.
how to get to know that person. That's again not the heart of God. Maybe God has called you to help bring a light to them that they didn't have before.
Mm.
So I've invited pastors to preach at my church who don't have a clue what our culture is going through or what the African American
Wow.
community is like. And I didn't expect them to come and preach like our people or understand our people, but I wanted to expose our people to them and what they believe. And
Right.
some of those pastors had made it their business to say, let me learn about your church and what your church is like and what it's doing. If more churches did that, we'd be a much better place.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I think a lot of pastors probably would say, hey, I want that. But then there's this little risk factor, right? It's a little bit, but I think it's a risk worth taking.
Absolutely. It is a risk worth taking. I remember I met a pastor, an Anglo pastor, a good dear friend of mine now, but I met him for the first time 18 years ago. And he was coming to do a crusade in Washington, D.C. And the Spirit of God said, have him preach at your Bible study this Tuesday night. And I invited him. And he and I have become close friends
Wow.
over, it's been 20 years actually, over
Wow.
20 years. But it was that risk. You're exactly right. It's taking that one little risk
Yeah.
that you may not know. Because normally I would never invite anybody to preach at our church that I hadn't heard preach ahead of time.
Right.
Sometimes you got to take that risk. If the Spirit of God gives you that nudge, and I believe that the Spirit of God has given people that nudge to do that and cultivate that relationship. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Our churches need that. Our communities need that.
Mm-hmm.
This has been such a life-giving and, both encouraging and challenging talk, Pastor John. I want to let everybody know the different ways that they can connect with you. If you want to know more about Pastor John, you can go to johnkjenkins.com for all things Pastor John. You can also check out their church, which is fbcglenarden.org. That's for First Baptist Church Glenarden. So fbcglenarden.org. You can go to johnkjenkins.com. And I know that you've expressed to me, Pastor John, that maybe social media isn't your strength, but you're there. They can find you there. Yeah. John K. Jenkins on Twitter, John K. Jenkins on Instagram, and I think John K. Jenkins on Instagram. So we're encouraging everybody to go out and connect with you, hear you a little bit, see you. I also want to mention, before some final words from you, Pastor John, I don't know if you've had a chance, Pastor John, to hold an AVAIL journal. Dr. Sam Chan and the AVAIL team, it just, every time I grab it, I say it feels good. It doesn't feel like a rinky-dinky magazine. It feels like a solid leadership. Yeah. There's some great content here. Have you had a chance to check it out?
Every last one of them that's been put out, I've got it. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. It's powerful.
We want everybody to know you can get a free subscription, annual subscription, free, and not free one journal, free annual subscription if you go to availjournal.com. Pastor John and I invite you to do so if you haven't done so. And man, we're just excited to keep producing content and resources that leaders can learn from and be equipped by. So Pastor John, this has been an awesome time on this podcast, just chatting, getting back, learning so much from you. What are some final thoughts you want to share with everybody?
Above all, figure out what your rhythm is. Figure out what your pattern, what it is that makes you tick, what it is that gives you strength. And develop that rhythm and stick to it. Find out what's your rest cycle. And make that happen. Please take care of yourselves. Please take care of yourselves and get the rest. God intends for you to get rest.
That's so good. Just finding that rhythm, for all the leaders listening, whether you are a, seasoned, experienced leader like Pastor John and have, decades of leadership and pastoring under your belt, or maybe you're a young leader who's just getting your feet wet in ministry or just learning about leadership. You have some great tools and some great wisdom that Pastor John has shared with all of us today. So make sure you take some time, listen back to this and take some notes down. It's so good and so wise to learn with people who are a little further down the journey than us. Pastor John, this has been a privilege for myself, for the AVAIL team, and for everybody who connects to this podcast. Thanks again for honoring us with your time. Send big hugs to your family, to your wife, your 6 kids, and your 5.5 grandkids at this moment. We're so thankful for you, Pastor John.
Thank you.
The Lord bless you and First Baptist Church of Glenarden. And for everybody who's connected, we expect you to connect with us for the next podcast where we continue to bring great content for all of you leaders out there. We love